Before we start with the lecture, I have a couple of announcements. Tomorrow, of course, we have our regular Friday Jummah prayers. And there is this second Arba'in walk in London from Stratford Station, opposite Ibis Hotel, to Marble Arch on the 3rd of October, which is Sunday, 2021, at 8 a.m. Ladies are also welcome. If you need to contact within this number 07515 45913 or 0790352 0090. Before we start with the night's talk, which will be a continuation of the talk that was done on Tuesday, on Arba'in, and we had started earlier on the week before. We will invite Brother Rashid to come and recite the verses related to this before we introduce Molana to the member. Let's welcome Brother Rashid with 3 great salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم. ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
وسلم وزد وبارك على رسول الله وآله الأطهار. أحسنتم جزاك الله الخير. What a way to introduce the last night on the topic. We now take this opportunity and invite our Molana for tonight, Syed, to the mimbar. Syed Taqi, Salat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم من يومنا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في قرآن الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم أحد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين أن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد ضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون. صلوات. First of all, to recite this part of the section of the Quran again after such a lovely recitation is certainly a disrespect to Brother Rashid. MashaAllah, his recitation far exceeds my recitation of the introduction of the ayat. So inshallah, may Allah, let's all do praise for him, that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes him a very strong reciter of the future, and inshallah in future he will be rewarded with the enlightenment of this book that we've been talking about for the last few days or last few sessions, the Quran, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This part of the discussion that I want to generate today with our conversation is, if you remember, we said that the ayats of this particular ayats, they're talking about a treaty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made with the children of Adam. Alam ahad ilaykum ya bani Adama. It says, don't forget, don't you forget, have you forgotten that treaty that we have made with you, children of Adam? What was that treaty? That you should not worship the shaitan, for he is your greatest enemy. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, worship me, for I am that straight path. Then he says that of shaitan, he then introduces the shaitan. He says, shaitan is something that he has misled many a people, taken many a people astray. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questions us, what? You have not seen that happen? Have you not seen that taking people astray? Why have you misjudged it? In reality, God is saying that the consequences of what is happening around in the world, why are you misjudging them? For they're the plans and the tampering which shaitan has created in the society. Yet still, you ignore it. In others, in some cases, because this section of the conversation that I'm having with you, we're also trying to say, what was that foundation of what made the Kufis? And this ayat is really that, these ayats really and truly enable us to realize the subject of these ayats. Who can be the subject of these ayats? In Arabic, they ask you, what's the misdaq of this ayat? What's the subject of this ayat? And of course, sometimes the misdaq of the ayat, not sometimes, every time the misdaq of this ayat or of an ayat is that shan and nuzul, the reason when that ayat was revealed, who it associated to. But having said that, there's also a very important aspect of the Quran, and that it also enlightens us and enables us to see how the terminology that the Quran uses, how it can then be explained and articulated to events or people of the future. The Quran is not just a specific timeline commodity. It is a aspect with the vocabulary, the compilation of its text is unbounded, unlimited in relation to who it could apply to or when it can apply to. Of course, the initial application, as I said, is when the Quran, the ayats were revealed. And of course, if you remember in our first conversation, we said the Quran has had 3 points of exposure. The first exposure is in the Lawh Mahfuz in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that first creation of the Quran. The second creation of the Quran is when it was revealed to the Holy Prophet in one go in his heart. In other words, that is an aspect which is called daf'i, in one occasion, spontaneous revelation. And then there's the third revelation, which is tadriji. Tadriji is when it appears at different staggered times of history to which that particular ayat, like the ayats which relate to Ghadir Khum, for example, or the ayats which are revealed at different times of the Quranic or of Islamic history. Those different times are relating to the tadriji, in other words, stage by stage. So when we see that the Quran has 3 exposures to its creation, that exposure means that people of different times can also affiliate and associate to the meanings of the text if we are genuine to the text, if we want to experience from the text why whether we are entrapped in those commentary or are we not entrapped in that commentary. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, particularly for those who may want to hear it in a more simpler terminology, does the Quran relate to us in the 21st century? Either we say no, then that's it, finished. What's it got to do with me? It was revealed, and there are many people in this day and age that say, well, the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. Its applications are 1400 years ago. What's it to do with me? There are a group of Muslims who say that it's got nothing to do with me. In the same manner as people say that we must have a Majlis Taqlid in London. How can a Majlis Taqlid 3,000 miles away answer to my problems? These are just corrupt ideas. Because you don't have to be, if you've got a beautiful heart doctor, he's living in Adelaide, you won't say, I have to go to Adelaide to show him my heart. You phone him up and say, this is my issue, can you please answer to it? In the same manner as, alhamdulillah, our Maraji of this time answered to our questions when they're 3,000 miles away. There's a movement in England which is trying to make, or in the West particularly, trying to make local Maraji, made in UK. Made in London. Majlis Taqlid Ayatollah Falani, made in London. This is a fallacy. It is an obstacle to the true nature of what Shia. Of course, if we had that level of Islamic doctrine and Islamic knowledge and Islamic houses and Islamic teaching or teachability, so as to say, then yes, Bismillah, create them. But at the moment, we don't have that. So you can't, it's like somebody sent me a question once saying, my father would like to be a marji of his own. And I almost wanted to say, well, you could answer to him in Urdu and say, yes, you can be marja. Marja is waqt. And that is the reality. You cannot be a marja. And he says, well, the problem is my father hasn't read anything. My father hasn't studied the Quran. He doesn't know much Arabic, but he wants to give his own fatwas. Well, okay. In Arabic, they say mufti. Or in Urdu, we also, there's something which is absolutely free of charge. We say mufti. Muft mein mil gayi. So, in reality, we have to be very careful how we affiliate the Quran to. But we have to learn and we have to understand the Quran genuinely has application for all times. And that's why when we looked at the people of Kufa, they were the misdaq, the subject of this ayat, which says, وَلَا تَعْبُدُوا الشَّيْطَانِ, don't worship the shaitan. What did they worship? Because we said in the first discussion, ibadat doesn't mean just putting out your prayer mat and start doing the sajda and the ruku. And this is not ibadat. Ibadat is what you do to demonstrate your obedience to something. So the Quran is saying, don't show your obedience to the desires of the shaitan. Don't be a bande, don't be a abd, don't be a subservient individual to shaitan's desires. And that is what they did. The Kufis showed their desires to the shaitan through the activities of Ubaidullah. Ubaidullah came into Kufa. He came in dressed like Imam Hussein so he could cheat the people. But then if they were not cheated, at least they realized that it was Ubaidullah, they should have parted company. Yet the dunya which they were affiliated to by the time Ubaidullah came to Kufa was far beyond their ability to recognize the shaitan's servant, the shaitan's commander, who Ubaidullah was on behalf of Yazid. So we see the reality is then it wasn't that the Kufis became what they became on the night of Muharram. This was a process of time. This was their lifestyle of how they were developing in their identity. That they were genuinely, as the Quran says, if we look at the Quran in the first small section, beginning sections of Surah Baqarah, it talks about three types of people in the world. Immediately the Quran defines it: Mu'min, Kaffir, Munafiq. Immediately these three categories are identified in the Quran in Surah Baqarah. So you know that Islam recognizes that there will be a group of people who will sit amongst you, or who will sit with us, calling themselves Muslims, but in reality they're ta'budu shaitan, the worshippers of shaitan. It is our ability or lack of ability which didn't enable us to recognize that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you could say, so clever even with the munafiq, that he makes the munafiq feel that he's fooled the believers. How? Because when a munafiq dies in our community, we bury him in a Muslim graveyard. Even till the time of his death, he thinks he's been fooling the Muslims. But on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that he was a munafiq. So he may feel that he's fooling the believers. But why does he do that? Why does a munafiq or anyone who affiliates to the ibadat of shaitan, why do they do that? We said first reason, we discussed it before last few days, was that because of mahjur, because of the fact that the followers of Islam have neglected the Quran. But there are I'm not trying to buy more time from you, but thank you for inviting me for the last few sessions. But this topic is so vast that it has no room to be completed in these 3 sessions. So, if later on, inshallah, we have another opportunity, I'll continue with this conversation around these ayats in another discussion. But the 3 main areas which I felt that the Kufis became Kufis and were subject of this ayat, that they became ta'budu shaitan, that they became servants of the shaitan, was one, because they'd ignored the Quran. They lost track of what the Quran was really talking about. They were just, as we said, even when these Kufis and Shamis and Misris and these people, when they were throwing stones or arrows at the Holy Prophet, they were shouting Takbir. They're saying Allahu Akbar. So they had totally lost track of what that Allahu Akbar generally relates to in the Quran, how it relates to a true believer. But the second thing, which the Kufis really and truly, why the Kufis become subject of this ayat, and we have to be so careful, is because of the fact that they had started worshipping one of the most dangerous things of one of those most dangerous tools of shaitan, and his means of making people his servant is to encourage the individuals towards the dunya. To attract you towards the dunya doesn't mean that you abstain from the world. You don't have to become these hermits, sit in the corner and just say Om, 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 thinking that you've become some hermit. No, because you see, I have to say one thing very important here, because a lot of people think that if you elevate yourself to such a level to God, in other words, you raise your station to such a level of connection to God, it means you have to abrogate and be absent from the dunya. That's not the case. Why I say that that's not the case? We say that Imam Khomeini was a very high level of irfan, a very high level of irfan. He had all his knowledge of Islamic mysticism and Islamic ethics and everything to such a level that the connectivity between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was like what he says in one of his books of Chel Hadith. He says, if a person raises himself to such a level with God, it is as if he is directly talking to God. That direct conversation with God, it may suddenly sound shirk, But no, that is how far you've elevated your own personal state to such a level that everything else around you when you're talking to God doesn't exist. It's you and him. So when somebody can be to that level, then the question arises, and this is the thing about dunya and this connection is wrong in that sense, is Imam Khomeini, his irfan, I define his irfan, I mean, in fact, I define irfan in two categories first, so then it becomes a little bit easier. Irfan means mysticism, and the level of Gnostic connection to Allah. Imam Khomeini's connection to Allah was very high. But what you have to understand, that irfan is of two types. You can have the irfan, which is called irfan, which I define, and a lot of writers define it, as irfan in infradi. In other words, the personal irfan. And then there's the irfan ijtimai, the social irfan. Now, you may think, what is this social irfan? You see, irfan in infradi, which is defined as infradi, is that personal irfan, which is Imam Khomeini's connection with God. That was complete. Then Imam Khomeini had no reason to fight the Shah to create Islamic hukumat. His aim with the Islamic hukumat was to bring the society's irfan to the level of God as well. In other words, elevate the public towards God as well. In other words, that's why he says that to create an Islamic government is more important than establishing salat. That's not kufr. You may think, establishing salat? What do you mean establishing an Islamic government is more important than establishing salat? Salat is surely what God wants, not Islamic government. The answer is no. Imam Khomeini says, if somebody does not believe in Islamic government, he will not fight to create an environment where salat is established. But if he creates Islamic government, he will be only an individual who establishes salat for himself, that he will want others to establish salat for them. In other words, that government is a government of salat, not an institution of praying. You know, Imam Khomeini says something really important. He says, you go to the West, they will allow you to build the biggest mosques. And this happened. In Bosnia, if you lot remember, those who remember it, in 1991, the Serbians killed hundreds of thousands of Bosnians. Srebrenica in 1991 was an evil place where the United Nations forces just sat down whilst the Serbs killed, murdered, and insulted Muslim girls and men and children. And they took men and children into the jungles and executed thousands of them. And United Nations just sat down, the blue helmets that they call themselves, they sat down and did nothing. But the friends of Bosnia used to say to me that whilst we as Muslims drank with these Serbians, hung around with these Serbians, did whatever these Serbians wanted us to do as un-Islamic, they were comfortable with us. The moment we said we want to open our masajid to practice Islam, they started attacking us. The attacking took place because the Bosnians started thinking about Islam more than their affiliation with the corrupt Serbs. And that is the thing. When we want to establish that, doesn't mean then in a society where we cannot have an Islamic government that we fight and kill everything. No, you create Islamic government in your own house. You know, if you can't stop televisions or facade being outside, at least you can stop in your own house from having satellites where corruption comes into your four walls. So you're establishing Islamic government around yourself. So the most important danger in becoming dunyai, or in becoming part of the dunya, because you see, again, another important thing which I said in a couple of our first session, I think, is, you know, when we read in the Qunut, we say, Rabbana atana fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana. What does that mean? It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, grant me goodness in this world and grant me goodness in the hereafter. You can immediately stop me and say, Molana, you're just talking about the dunya, not to be affiliated to the dunya. Why is this qunut? Because this qunut is Hazrat Ibrahim's dua. He says, God, grant me goodness in this world and grant me goodness in the hereafter. So why are you telling me not to want the dunya? This dua is not saying, God, give me goodness of the dunya. It's saying, God, give me goodness of the dunya so I can use it with your satisfaction to acquire the goodness of the hereafter. That's what this dua is saying. This dua is not saying, and I think I might have said it to you lot as well, that, you know, in Arabic, we have the word lam alif, which means la, which means no. But us who speak Urdu, we say which means la, or la ke de mujhe. You know, and that's not what la is. La means stop it there. It's enough for me. It's enough dunya that I need. It's enough dunya I need. Why? Because I'm using it to acquire your satisfaction, God. In other words, that connectivity with God has been established. That connectivity that we want to have Allah's rizayat, have Allah's satisfaction from us is there. If we could, there's a lovely dua, which I think some of our children should learn it and be firmly tight with that dua. It says, God, I thank you for what you have given me and for that which you have not given me. God, I thank you for what you have given me and for that which you have not given me. For had you had given it to me, I don't know how I would have used it. Look at the philosophy of that dua, which is being taught to the kids. Actually, I shouldn't say kids. Malcolm X, somebody asked him, how are your kids? He says, my only goats have kids. My children are fine. So all our children must be taught this, that I thank God for what he has given me and thank God for what he has not given me. For had he had given it to me, I don't know how I would have used it. In other words, with what I have, I'm so greedy. With what I have, I want more. If you give me more, what would I do with that more of my future? I'm grateful for what you have. So to get to that dissatisfactory position of the dunya, there's a lovely ayat in Surah Nahl, which is the 16th surah, ayat 95. It says, وَلَا تَشْتَرُوا بِأَهْدِ اللَّهِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا, which means do not take a small price in exchange for that covenant that you have made with Allah. What is that small price? Small price doesn't mean that somebody's going to come and give you 5 pence. There's a lovely story about a Alimuddin. In the coldest winter, he used to come out of the house, go to his well, and pull out water and do wudu with it. One day he went to pull out water, and when he pulled the can to the bucket up, the bucket was full of jewels, full of silver, diamonds. And he's thinking, this is salat time. I need to pray. I need water to do my wudu. What am I going to do with this? He threw it back into the well. Then he pulled it up again. Then he found again full of jewels. He saw again. He said, I want to do wudu. My namaz, my salat shab is in question here. Because the shaitan is throwing him, and he obviously, if he pulled it up, he's going to sit there counting. The dawn time would finish. And he realized again, shaitan. He threw it. The third time he pulled out water. And then he said, thank God I didn't lose my salat with these shaitan's activities. The reality is this. That, and again, another example is Thamanan Qalilan, that little wealth of exchange. Allah is saying in this ayat, don't take that little change of the dunya, from the dunya, to sell off that big agreement you have made with me. Not just big agreement that I will be a Muslim, but look at the reverse side. Is if I remain a Muslim, what has God promised us? That everlasting life after this dunya. That 60 years are more valuable for us to pick up that change, to exchange God's ahad. So then we lose out the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of life after that 75, 85, 95 years of life that we have here. The exchange is so small. We're saying, okay, for my happiness of the 95 years, I want to sell the thousands and thousands of years with God. And I used to have a lovely ustad. He used to say there's a very small sentence which makes the whole difference between a human being who is godly and a human being who's not godly. He said there are those who live to die, and there are those who die to live. And it's so clear. If you're dying to live, you kick somebody, beat something, rob somebody just to live. You're dying to live. But there are those who know that this living is just that eventually you're going to die. So when you're going to eventually die, there's no issue to that. There's an end to this whole exercise. But the ayat is saying, don't sell your ahad that you made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a small return. That small return is shaitanic return. We all have to live. I'm not saying that, and this is something which Islam detests, that you become replicates of destitutes. You can work, your hands are good, your feet are good, your mind is good, but you must go and get your social security. You must get your universal credit. No. God's given you hands, feet, arms, work. Islam demands you to work. Destitution is not the cause of your inability. Destitution is you don't want to go and work sometimes. So if you can work, you must, of course. Islamic society caters for those, and Islamic society should cater for, and the social services system that the West has, that is based on the back of Islamic systems of sadaqat, on the back of the Baitul Mal, on the back of the distribution of Islamic wealth, taxing people, khums, sadaqat, all these are, or zakat, these are all those funds which are to help the destitute. And that's why it's so important. First of all, Islam says, if you've got sadaqat, then don't look for some ajnabi, don't look for someone who's got nothing to do with you. Find your poor relatives. Give the sadaqat to your poor relatives. But then give the sadaqat to your poor relatives, not that such you know that he's going to take it and spend it on the first Indian film. But either you spend it on a family. As they say, give the person the ability to fish, not give him the fish. In the same manner, in our India and Pakistan, some families, they just send money. If you know, or even in Kenya or wherever, you know that if you give them enough money to buy a car or a rickshaw or something, then give the money to buy they can work for their living. Don't make that. It is haram to give even a Syed khums. If he, for example, has the money of about 8,000 pounds, and 2,000 pounds is enough for his yearly income, you don't say, okay, sit down, I'll give you 10,000 pounds. You just give him 2,000 pounds. In other words, you only top up their needs with the funds. So that's where the destitution needs to be controlled. So it's how we do not want people to become destitute, Islam, but that doesn't mean that if we have poor people in our communities, we ignore them. But you see, where we find that people would say, people will say so many good things and condemn our own communities, but they don't realize that you don't get anything free here. It's all from your taxes. And if those taxes weren't there, then go back, about 150 years back. You're in East London. You know that 1 square mile of the city of London was controlling the whole world. There's a lovely saying which said that regarding the British Empire. The British Empire used to say that British Empire is such that nowhere in the world, British Empire is such that the sun never sets on it. So somebody said something really beautiful. He says, yes, because God was afraid that if it does set, you'll do all sorts of stupid things under the shade and in the darkness. So the sun never sat on the British Empire. But that 1 square mile of the city, which was controlling the whole world, you just come down half a mile from there to Bethnal Green, and people were living in poverty. People didn't have shoes. Just half a mile from the city of London. So you could see that, where you have even wealth, if you don't provide, that's why it's so important to understand that Islam does not say you can't be wealthy, but Islam says you can't be greedy like the city of London and leave the rest of the people around you, like Bethnal Green, like Stepney, to run into poverty. And you know what the level of poverty which was here at that time? The workhouses, the destitution. Children did not live more than majority of kids died in the first 6 months. And this was Britain. And we say to we think all sorts of things. When I'm not running this situation down, but the point is there has to be a reality of our thinking. Salawat. So when we look at this, when we look at the dunya as greed, then we understand that this is not that greed is then becomes that cheap purchase. Because if you're greedy, you want more and more and more. It means that you are neglecting the fact that you have made an agreement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will help those who do not have. That's part of the agreement with Allah. that you will help those who do not have. Not that you just take and take and take without, like for example, the Saudi family, that oil under their feet. It's meant to be a barakat for the Muslim Ummah. Not the money to bet away at the first Victoria gambling casino where King Fahad put on £6 million on one bet and he lost it. Yeah, that is the reality. That's another prince. So, but then you see, we have to understand this very important thing, that whilst dunya is such an unwanted commodity in the arrangements of not following the shaitan, because as I said, the dunya or its misrepresentation of the dunya is shaitan's tool. But Islam doesn't say that you mustn't desire the dunya. What it says is you should not allow the dunya to control you. You should control the dunya. In other words, the lights of the world should not beckon you to come. You should be ready to switch those lights off whenever you can. That is where the control factor comes in. And I say again that the concept that I'm developing, inshallah, and hopefully, I'm not promoting my book at the moment, but it'll come out in the next maybe few months, about the fact that there's a difference between the perfect man and the man of perfection. It's very important to understand that. A perfect man, he will switch off the lights whenever he needs, because he knows that those lights are going to take away his perfection, which he needs to have in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the man of perfection would endeavor to make sure those lights remain on him, regardless of who's around whom he's making darkness. And that's why it's very important to understand that part of Ayatul Kursi, which is the last bit, which says, Allah waliyullazina amanu yukhrijum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur walladhina kafaru awliyahum at-taghut yukhrijunahum min an-nur ila adh-dhulumat. What is that ayat saying? It's saying Allah waliyullazina amanu yukhrijum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur. Here is the point which we have to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I am the wali of the mu'mineen. I take them out of darkness and put them into light. You can say, hang on, stop here. If you're mu'min, how come you're in the darkness? Allah needs to take you out from darkness and bring you into light. Allah is the wali of mu'mineen. He takes them out of darkness and puts them into light. What it means is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that absolute nur. If you distance yourself, you will be in the darkness from that nur. You will be a mu'min, but you will be like any light. You see this light? Around me is brightness, but outside in me, at my direction is bright, but around me is light, darkness. This is exactly what Allah's nur is. Allah's nur is directly on the iman. And everything else, ayat slowly becomes darker. And that's what this ayat is saying. That yes, Allah is the wali of the mu'minin, but don't be a mu'min who's in the darkness. Try to be the mu'min who's in the light. But Allah is ready nevertheless, that if you happen to be a mu'min in the darkness, He'll pull your arms and bring you into the light. That's what this ayat is saying in its reality. It's not an ayat which is a contradiction to the mu'mineen. That if Allah is the wali of the mu'min, then how come He's taking the mu'min out of light and putting into darkness? That's because a mu'min is in the darkness and he needs to be brought into the light if he doesn't follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command and does not become وَنَعْبُدُونِي هَذَا صِرَاطُ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, that worship me. I am that straight path. Because that straight path is that straight light onto the human being. So when and the ibadat of the shaitan is that slowly departure from that light towards the darkness. And that's why the next part of the ayat says that وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاهُمُ الطَّاغُوتُ, and that's for those who are disbelievers. Their kings or their lords and their authority are the taghut. What do? They cheat you and bend you and lie to you to take you out of the light and put you into the darkness. Whilst Allah is saying, no, I'm so merciful, I'll still take you out from the darkness, put you in the light. But the shaitanic powers are saying, even if you're in the light, and we become trapped in that. We become trapped in that. How do we become trapped? If we find some people in our community who do bad deeds, they say, oh, that's it. The shaitan's taken you. Get lost. That's wrong. We should, because that is the tool of putting more people in the arms of the shaitan. We should find means of helping them to eradicate their darkness so then they can come back into the nur. Not kick them out so then they fall into the laps of the shaitan that was the Muslim children. They could have been in the nur, but now from the nur, the shaitan is taking them into darkness. Let's play the game properly. Our responsibilities must be understood properly. And if we don't, then that's why we know so many people around us. Had they were given just a few minutes of help of the deen, they would have remained with us. But they've got lost. Because we don't understand how to pull them back in, to enable them to come out from that distant darkness of the iman to the light of the deen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light. Salawat. So one of the most important things, as I said, is greed. The dunya also attracts you with wealth and position. And that's, Brother Samad, how much time do I have? It's 10 past almost. Okay. Just a few more minutes, then we'll inshallah go into the Masai. The dunya also gives you the desires and the wealth and pulling you towards the dunya. You know, sometimes I tell our friends, if you're clerical staff and anything above that means you have to do haram things to acquire the attention of the managing director, then remain a clerical staff. Don't strive to be, deputy to the managing director. For example, if you need to become a deputy to the managing director, when you go to Pakistan, when you come back, you must bring him a bottle of champagne like everybody else bring a bottle of champagne for him. Why? Why? Because you want to become the deputy to him. So is it good to be a deputy on the back of haram activities? It's better to remain a low-level clerk than to strive to qualify. And in the same manner, I say to our parents whose children decide to do certain A-levels, be careful, help them to select A-levels which will not make them compromise their deen in going for those A-levels or those subjects which may be inappropriate. But it's important that we do not go, and this is the illness of our communities. When we want to find a daughter want to find a son for our daughters, we say, wealth kahan hai, paisa kahan hai, makan kahan hai. What is all that? It's important. You don't want to put your daughter in the hands of a destitute whose earnings are the universal credit. Of course you don't. But you want to make sure that at least the person, is not sleeping till the Fajr in the mornings when the poor girl is waking up to do her salat. So, but then the important thing is let's wake him up at 7 o'clock so he's off to the bank to do his job. Namaz ka waqt bhi chalega, sab chalega, main kaam par to jayega. That's dangerous. Wealth and desires distance you and make you more dunya than the aspects of work and life. And to have a position, there's an institution or there's an activity which I'll just say in a couple more minutes and finish on this. There's some people who are promoting certain things which are in our fiqh arguments have a lot of difficulties to accept. And that is, for example, whether you can eat food which has been prepared by people who are mushriks, not kafirs, who are mushriks. In others, people who are idol worshippers or those who are totally outside any definition of al-kitab. And some people are promoting that, no, it's okay. You can eat their food. But you have to be so careful because those who are promoting it, these people are so deeply involved in the discussions of interfaith dialogue that they know that if they don't promote the eating of food from those who are mushriks, then they will not be able to entertain the interfaith communication because they're people who are Buddha-paras, they're people who are Buddhists, they're people who are Hindus, they're people who are total mushriks. They bring food into the interfaith meetings. They're going to get kicked out. So they're promoting this very heavily, that it's okay to eat. You see, most recently, the fatwa is that you can eat food prepared by somebody who's Ahl Kitab, not who is a mushrik. There may be a future change in the opinion, but at the moment, the Ahl Kitab you can eat, but the mushriks are defined as their kufr zati. There's a difference in kufr. There's kufr zati and kufr arzi. Kufr zati means that kufr which is embedded in the individual. And that kufr which is embedded arises from shirk. Not that kufr on, you see the difference between kafir and the mushrik is that the mushrik includes somebody with God. The kafir separates God from other things. That's the difference. So kafir, we can to some extent entertain their involvement as long as it's not cooking pork or cooking with animal fat, which is not permissible. But we cannot eat food prepared by Buddhists and those people who define themselves as total mushriks. Yet there are people around, there are some people with Maya Mamas on who are promoting the fact that you can eat from the food prepared by people who are mushriks, which is present-day fatwas are absolutely unacceptable. So one has to be alert. We have to make that clear to people when they're promoting this, that how much are you, we should ask them, how much are you involved in the interfaith that you're promoting this argument? Otherwise, that's the reality. Now, greed, and the other thing, final thing, is sometimes people become dunyavi because they're afraid of those who are part of the dunya. That they will attack them, or they will deprive them, or they would make things difficult for them. But if you have itminan, if you have certainty in Allah, then you don't have to be afraid of those who are the standard bearers of the shaitan. You got to remember on this, we shall conclude, that those who were on the battlefield of Karbala, we read in Ziyarat Arba'in, Salawat. We read in Ziyarat Arba'in the part which says, Ma'akum, la ma'aduvukum. I am with you, not with the enemies of you. That's what we've learned. And that's what we learned from the people who were on the battlefield. The beauty of the people on the battlefield who were on Imam Hussein's side, and the difference of those who were with Yazid's side, that those who were on Yazid's side, they were looking at the tents, those things which they could raid, the money they could make, the shahare that was going to be given to Ibn Sa'ad. All these things, that the dunya was being seen from them. But those who were on Imam Hussein's side, they didn't even see Yazid's army. What they were seeing, that behind them was the door of Jannah. That's the difference between these. The Imam Hussein's soldiers were looking behind Yazid's army as the door of heaven, and the Yazid's army was looking behind Imam Hussein's army, the dunya which they were going to get. And those who were with Imam Hussein, they were not afraid of Yazid's army. But those who were with Yazid, they were afraid of Imam Hussein. That's why, as I said to you, when it came to Hazrat Ali Asghar, it almost destroyed Yazid's army, that he had to ask Hurmula to fire that arrow. But we left our conversation of Karbala and the events of Karbala on the day of Arba'in. But the Musibat did not finish then. The Masaib did not finish then. The Masaib continued even to the gates of Medina. The family reaches Medina, and Hazrat Zainab, Imam Zainul Abidin, says to Bashir, go and announce that the caravan, the raided caravan of Imam Hussein has arrived. The raided Bashir goes into Medina and announces that Hussein has been killed, and his family, which was imprisoned, are now at the doors of Medina. It is said that Muhammad Hanafiya, brother of Imam Hussein, hears this. He goes to the caravan, and as he's approaching the caravan, he sees a white-haired, poor old man, back broken, standing there. Hazrat Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam receives Hazrat Muhammad ibn Hanafiya and calls him Ammu, uncle. Hazrat Muhammad Hanafiya realizes that this is Hazrat Zainul Abidin. He faints. Can you imagine all the zulm that Imam Zainul Abidin has seen with his eyes? Hazrat Muhammad Hanafiya had only heard it and he fainted. Imam Zainul Abidin had been seeing it throughout his trip up to here. But Hazrat Zainab Salamullah alayha, she is the standard bearer of Imam Hussein's army of Karbala. She's brought the children up to here. Now in Karbala, in Sham, she didn't cry for her children. Still, she doesn't cry for her children. She goes to Medina, goes to the grave of her grandfather, and there she cries to him about what has happened to Imam Hussein. There she cries to him of what has happened to Hazrat Abbas. She cries what has happened to Ali Akbar. Then she goes to her mother's grave and cries on the same issues. Yet still she doesn't cry until she comes to the house. She comes to her house and she comes in. Hazrat Jafar, her husband, he comes in and he sees an old woman in the house. She says, he comes in and he says to this lady, "Are you in the wrong place?" And she says, "Abdullah, you don't recognize me? I'm Zainab. I'm Zainab. Let me go to my children's room. For up till now, I've not cried for honor Muhammad." I will go in, and she goes to honor Muhammad's room, and she sits there, seated, and now she sheds her tears, her grief of not being able to receive their heads in Kufa, not to have received their heads in Sham. Now she's there, the genuine mother who had given away the sadaqat for her brother, now receiving the grief of the sadness of the loss of her two children. Hazrat Zainab cries, but it is said that two very important ladies who had realized. One was Hazrat Abbas's mother, Baneen. It is said that when the message came into Medina that the raided family of Imam Hussein has come. It is recorded, it is said that when Baneen realized this, she stood up and facing Najaf, saying, is it that Abbas never helped Hussein? She said, I will never forgive him my milk if he sacrificed Hussein and did not help him in the battle against Yazid. This is Hazrat Zainab, Hazrat Imam, Hazrat Abbas's mother, and then of course it is really sad to know that Imam Zainul Abidin, throughout his time in Medina, he would not stop crying. People would say, well, why don't you stop crying? He would repeat just a lot of things, but one of those things for our conversation is that he says that when he sees a butcher, he says, whilst you're slaughtering this animal, what do? They said that, Mawla, we are Muslims, we give this animal water. He would look towards Karbala, he says, well, my father was slaughtered without water. I pray that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us practicing mu'mineen, keeps us on the right path, makes us ready for the 12th Imam. If we're not alive, that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us to train our next generation to join him. I pray that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects on Maraji, particularly Wilayat al-Faqih, Ayat al-Uluzma, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, that inshallah we can be united under his command. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma kulli waliyaka al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توأة وتمتعه فيها طويلة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ماتم حسين.
No, stand up. I don't see him coming. فاطمة 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 يا فاطمة يا فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة 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 يا فاطمة يا فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة 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 يا فاطمة يا فاطمة يا زهراء فاطمة 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 يا فاطمة يا فاطمة يا زهراء. Our hearts so hollow, our hearts so hollow, our joy is sorrow. They say bright days after dark nights follow. But how can light follow today's night tomorrow when the lantern of the world is but a shadow? Oh, Fatima, but your light will forever glow. Oh, our tears for your loss will forever flow. Fatima, 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 ya Fatima, ya فاطمة 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 يا ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسينا ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسين. If you heard Zainab's cries, if you heard Zainab's cries, at your door she arrives with bags under her eyes, you would not be able to recognize Zainab. Broken in Karbala, shattered in Syria, exhausted in Kufa, she has now returned to see her true paradise. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسين 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 حسينا. ما ننسى ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسين. Brother, I have returned. Brother, I have returned. For your chest she did yearn. Life is a test she learned. I left your daughter in Sham where she sleeps alone, without her father's chest, buried with her burnt dress. To mother she attests the pain we endured from your death till the court of Sham. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسينا. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسين 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 حسينا. If you heard Zainab well, if you heard Zainab well, as Hussein calls for help, Abbas is gone as well. The sun sets in the land of Karaban wa Bala. The moon has lost its arms. Zainab has lost Abbas. An angel calls adhan for the resting corpse of Hussein Shuhada. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. ما ننسى حسين ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسينا ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسين. If you heard Zainab mourn as Hussein's clothes were torn, if you heard Zainab mourn as Hussein's clothes were torn, shrouded in blood and nur, Zainab is looking at these pieces of her heart. Scattered in Karbala, slaughtered in Karbala, scattered in Karbala, slaughtered in Karbala. Hussein, 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 Husseina. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. Oh, أبد والله يا زهرة يا زهرة. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسين 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 حسينا. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسين. إيه ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسينا. ما ننسى حسينا ما ننسى حسينا حسين 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 حسينا. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين.